You know, and even the last concert, there's a few videos. But you can't see the whole concert. Not as a released box set, you know, digitally enhanced, none of that stuff. And I think it's a shame because sure, Elvis was a little overweight at the time and he wasn't feeling well and he was sick. That's all the more reason why it's so impressive. I mean, honestly, if you think about it, if the man was sick and he wasn't feeling good and he wasn't at his best as far as himself, and his voice was as awesome as it was, sure, in that song you can hear he's breathing a little hard. But my God, can you hear the voice? Can you hear his strength in that voice? I mean, can you hear the compassion in that voice? I mean, for God's sakes, people, that right there is why he's the king of rock and roll. It's not because he was a young kid and he sang Hound Dog. It's not because he sang That's All Right Mama when he was like 18, 19 years old. It's because when he was 42 and he was at the bottom of his health and he was at the end of, you know, everything was coming against him at the time, his voice never gave out. Never gave out. I mean, in a matter of fact, the 1977 Elvis is way better a singer than the 1954 Elvis, by far. I mean, his voice just completely transcends music. He is the greatest of all time, period. You know, Elvis was a fan of all music, and Elvis would tell you himself that he wasn't the greatest singer. But I would tell Elvis, you're wrong. You were the greatest singer because you could do all kinds of music, and you could do it your way, and you didn't have to be somebody else. You were yourself, and your voice could do anything. You could sing the phone book and sound good. Honestly. That's why Elvis is the king of rock and roll, period. And always will be the king of rock and roll. And as a matter of fact, I think he's the king of music, period. All music, to be honest with you. Not just rock and roll. Elvis is the king of music. Because he didn't just do rock and roll. He did country, he did gospel, he did folk, he did blues. He did all music. Now sure, each genre has their own person that they say is great. Muddy Waters, you know, blues. You know, Michael Jackson, pop. You know, rock and roll Elvis, of course. You know, heavy metal, you know, it might be, you know, Led Zeppelin or something. Depending on who you like, you know. But the bottom line is Elvis did almost every type of music, and he did it better than anybody else out there. So, to me, Elvis is the king of music, not just rock and roll. But the last concert, and every performance from 1973, let's just go from the Hawaii concert on. Every single performance from that point on is deserving of being listened to, is deserving of being shown. You know, Elvis Presley didn't need to be 170 pounds to be Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley at 220. Elvis Presley at 230. Whatever you want to claim he was. You know, I'll tell you right now, at one point Elvis was 260 pounds. Who gives a shit? Honestly, who cares? If he was 260 or 170. The man had an awesome voice, period. And I'll tell you right now, at 260 or 170, the women would have lined up to be with the man. Because whether he was 170 or 260, he was still the best looking guy out there, and he still had the best voice of all time. So who gives a flying shit? Who cares, man? I mean, we're talking about a singer, we're talking about an entertainer, and we're talking about a man. And Elvis was great in every single category. He was a great singer, he was a great man, and he was a great humanitarian. Elvis was good in everything he did. As a matter of fact, Elvis was great in everything he did. He was a great father. Even though he wasn't there all the time, he was still a great father. You can see that in Lisa Marie each and every day, that he brought up a great daughter, and that goes to Scylla, and that goes to Elvis. They were great parents. He was a great father. He was a great singer. He was a great humanitarian. The man would give the shirt off his back for anybody. After Hawaii, you guys need to know how Elvis really was. You know, a matter of fact, I will say this with all sincerity. My favorite Elvis Presley time period was Elvis after the Hawaii concert. To be honest with you, that is my favorite Elvis time period. You know, most people say, oh, I like Elvis in the 50s. I liked him in the 60s. I liked him in the early 70s when he was really, you know, coming into Vegas in 69 and 70. I like Elvis after the Hawaii concert because I think that's when his voice actually became the best it ever was. I honestly believe that after the Hawaii concert, Elvis was the best he ever was. His singing voice was better than it had ever been. He was a student of music. He had become the best performer. He had brought it all together. He had made himself into the king of rock and roll, truly. He had made himself into the king of rock and roll. Because in 1973 to 1977, Elvis didn't rely on just his looks and his movements and his, you know, his stage presence to sell his shows. He knew that maybe those things weren't at the peak at that point. He had to rely on his voice. And that's why I think he was at his best. So if you truly just listen to the music, Elvis Presley was at his best from 1973 on. Prior to that, I think he relied on his good looks and his movement and his stage presence and less on his voice. But as he got older, he realized that, you know, the youth of America was going to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and, you know, the Yardbirds and other groups. So he had to work vocally. He had to work on his voice to become who he was going to be. And ultimately, Elvis was working towards singing. He wasn't ever going to be opera, but he wanted to make his voice into some operatic voice. He wanted to be, you know, because let's face it, opera singers are way better than a lot of singers out there. You know, their voice is trained. Their voice is great. And he wanted to be like that, but he also wanted to, you know, to do the big show, the big strong songs. So that's what he was working towards. And ultimately, Elvis was working towards gospel. If Elvis had had his druthers, he was going to do two things in this world before he passed away. He was going to become an actual actor and not do the 31 movies and the 2 documentary movies he did. He was going to do actual performance movies where he could actually act, which is why I like Charo, because he got to act in the movie. But he was going to become an actor, and he was going to do gospel music. That was his goal. A lot of people say, you know, had Elvis lived, you know, what would have happened? You know, yeah, sure, he would have still sang. But, you know, the fact that he passed away in 1977 at the peak of his career, to be honest with you, is the reason why he is the superstar, megastar, and the icon that he truly is. Because he when he passed away, he was in music. You know, had he lived, he would have been an actor. He would have went into gospel, and he might not have been able to do as many shows, concerts, because he was actually starting to separate himself from Tom Parker. You know, he was starting to remove himself from being with Tom Parker. So ultimately, had he lived, he would have separated himself from Tom Parker. They were already in the midst of removing himself as Tom Parker being his manager. But, you know, when he passed away, you know, of course, Tom Parker was still his manager. But in years to come, he would have got away from Tom, and he would have went his own separate way. And Elvis didn't even need a manager at that point, because all he had to do is say, I'm Elvis Presley, and I'm signing my name here, and you're going to give me this, and that's going to be the way it is, and thank you very much, have a nice day. Elvis didn't need a manager. He knew that, but Elvis was very loyal. So for that reason, Elvis stuck with Tom Parker because he felt he owed him something. Well, Elvis didn't owe anybody anything. Anybody that was around Elvis was made because of Elvis. They weren't made because, you know, they were this great person. You know, Tom Parker was made because of Elvis. Yeah, sure, he had helped Hank Snow and a couple other acts at the time, but Elvis made Tom Parker. Tom Parker didn't make Elvis. Elvis could have been managed by my cat and been, you know, famous. Elvis made himself. That's the truth. But with that said, guys, I just wanted to kind of go into that a little bit, and since we played the video was played in the room, kind of explain why I'm so adamant about it. You know, because Elvis Presley didn't die after the Hawaii concert. But if you were to watch the videos and the movies that are out there and the documentaries, you would think that Elvis stopped after the Hawaii concert. You know, there's a whole 4 or 5 years of great performances, of great videos that you could see. And I think that it needs to be out there because, frankly, like I said, my favorite Elvis is from 1972 on. Not 1954 on. 1972 on. That's my Elvis. That's who I know.